Hey guys, it's Josh, and welcome back to the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad, your favorite podcast for learning how to balance between being a functional adult and a raging dumpster fire. Some days, we're all a bit of a dumpster fire. Joining us inside the Bachelor's Pad today is JT Tran. Thank you so much for making time for me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Josh. I feel warmed by the dumpster fire with you.
We burn brightly, and it's hard to take your eyes off of a dumpster fire when you see it. So many questions.
Yeah, like you were talking about, like how dating has sort of evolved, changed since we were younger. So it's its own like new version of a dumpster fire in the dating scene.
100%. Like I said, we were talking about how, so in my lifetime, I think dating has had like a 4-sequence arc. We had the introduction of dating apps, and then we had the oversaturation of dating apps, then COVID, and now post-COVID. I think all of those different moments in time really created leaps and bounds in the way that we not only think about romance, but the way we just operate in any relationship we're in, whether that's romantic or platonic.
Right. This is probably dating myself, but when I got into what we call like the game, like I was very much a late bloomer. Like I didn't kiss my first girl or date until I was 20, which is sort of typical for Asian guys. We're much late bloomers compared to everybody else. But I remember trying to date. And again, this is like as dating apps online started to come into play, they weren't super popular. There was still sort of like a stigma associated with it. Like, oh, you met someone online, that's kind of weird. I remember going on eHarmony, and this is the time where you had to take a personality test and you had to pay for membership, right? Just to join. And I did all of that, and I get a reply back saying, hey, we can't find you a match. You're too analytical, so here's your money back. And that's when I got into oh, wow, even this company won't take my money. There must be some way for me to be more successful at dating, because I wasn't willing to just throw in the towel and say that I was, going to be a loser for the rest of my life. But now, like I said, especially with COVID, like everybody got into the apps, and there's sort of like a pushback against apps. But you definitely see in this current generation, there are like studies that I've read online that suggest that this generation is more single than ever before. So even though dating has become more, the apps have flooded the dating market, it hasn't solved the problem of dating for guys and girls.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There have been so many studies over, let's just say, the last 3 to 5 years on how the culture's changed, what trends to look out for, where we're at. I think there's a study that says by like 2030 or 2035 that over 80% of women will be single if they're not already like married or in like a committed relationship. That's what it's the time. It's a men's market, so to speak, just because you're gonna have all these single people coming out of dysfunctional relationships or who've just waited so long or waiting for the quote unquote Mr. Right that they're like, I'll entertain almost anything now.
Well, I tell my students that this generation, really, we are the most powerful generation of men to ever existed. I know some people will push back on that, and that's because they probably have a victim mentality, but anything you want to learn, you can learn. Go on YouTube, go on the Googles. You can learn how to be funny. You can learn how to dress well. You can learn hygiene. You can learn storytelling. You can learn dancing, all for free if you just go on YouTube. And you can, empower yourself. It's just that, we live in this world where there's so many options and so much information. People have a hard time trying to determine what they need to embody. But as women say, the bar is so low. If you as a guy can just meet and surpass that bar, you're going to outperform a whole bunch of other men. Like honestly, especially if you're going like, my preference is like meeting women in real life, right? So it's just like guys, they have to be willing to put in that effort and have the emotional resilience to withstand the pain of like in-person rejection. But that's hard. Like this generation have definitely lived in a time of just being perpetually online, right? Blame it on COVID, but it's like the real actions in real life.
And I think there's a fine line, and I want to clarify, you can tell me I'm wrong, but when you say like this generation of men, I would even like to like hone in on that. I would say the pre-2000 kids, because I feel like after 2000, you're right, everybody just grew up online. They're so digital that I think we talked about this last season or maybe earlier this season, that a lot of people have trouble looking people in the eye nowadays. You and me are similar in the fact that we love meeting people in real life, but it's really hard to connect in real life if you can't look somebody in the eye. I was like,
Yeah.
no, how many videos you watch, no matter how much game you have or how long you've been in the game, if you can't make that in-person connection, I was like, good luck. I was like, not even good luck. I was like, I don't know what you're really going to do.
It was really interesting you make that point because I teach predominantly Asian men. I mean, I teach all white, black, but because of who I am, what I look like, Asians come to me mostly. And so in Asian culture, eye contact isn't that common. So when I coach them, like eye contact definitely like has to be worked upon. And so it just occurs to me that in many ways, this generation has become more like otaku, the Japanese otaku.
Yeah.
Right? It's become very much insulated in comparison. But again, this is where the advantage. If you're willing to go and meet people in real life, you're going to be much more effective and more powerful than just the online dating app.
I completely agree. The only thing more powerful than an algorithm is charisma, or I should say it's just that simple. I'm not going to say it's easy because a lot goes into it and there's so many different variations. But that kind of brings me to a point. You mentioned how you coach a lot of men, especially Asian men, or just, other minorities sometimes. This is a two-part question. One, I was like, we've all gotten advice from somebody. So what's the wildest piece of dating advice that you've ever gotten that you were like, no way this is going to work, and it actually kind of worked out?
I mean, this isn't something that I super encourage because it needs to be taken with some nuance. Because like back in the day, I grew up in sort of like the Project Hollywood, the game. If anyone is familiar with Neil Strauss, and there's just the idea like peacocking, right? You dress kind of like outlandishly in order to get female attention, and then even by sort of like extension of that is if you look or kind of like act gay, that would disarm women. And what's curious is like a lot of guys, have taken that where a lot of Gen Z, they have taken a more androgynous, effeminate look. What used to be like black fingernails was like, that's weird, but now like a bunch of guys wear fingernail polish. It's like sort of like the norm. Not quite normal, but is more normalized. And
Exactly.
so, yeah. And so, I definitely played around with peacocking. And I still do, where the idea is like, to be a little bit edgy, to be noticed. But that was definitely something that got me outside of my comfort zone where, hey, I'm not that great looking of a guy. I'm not handsome or anything like that. But if I can peacock, if I can be flashy, then I get noticed and like women like start coming to me. And it isn't the, oh, just be like the strong, silent type kind of standing in the shadows in the corner and brood, right? It's like, be a little bit flashy with your personality and your look and your mannerisms, and that will demand like women's attention. Although again, trying to play up a little bit to the feminine or kind of like gay persona can definitely like shoot you in the foot.
You're right. It's a tightrope at times where it's a balance of, is it too feminine? Is it too ambiguous? Because this is universal, regardless of gender. People don't like to guess when it comes to dating. We like a little bit of mystery, but we like to know we're on the right track. So you're right. I think peacocking has always been a thing, but you really have to, it's a careful line because you could easily misrepresent yourself and miss a lot of opportunities, or it's also maybe the quickest way to end up in a friend zone situation that you don't want to end up in.
Yeah. So there's this one line I remember Mystery using. It's like, oh, if I wasn't gay, I'd totally be making out with you. And that works. Like I saw him use it and it worked. But again, he's like a 6 foot tall white guy. He is most women's male archetype, right? And one time I used that, and she's like, "Yeah, okay, you're gay." I was like, "Okay, not really what I was going for," because the idea of sort of like distance myself from the idea, like I'm like the hunter, right? But again, being a small Asian, like I do want to draw attention to me. I also want to display the masculinity in at least as defined in Western senses to get her sexually interested in me.
So you kind of talked about it, but not really talked about it. And I think we're on the same camp as this on this idea that rejection is a friend that we know very well. A lot of people are afraid of rejection, but I tend to embrace it. Do you think there's any positive outcomes that can come from being rejected?
Yeah, I think that learning rejection helps you build emotional resilience. This is something that everybody needs in life because there aren't many things that I can guarantee anyone 100%. You can have 100% control over what I do. That's basically it. But also how you choose to interpret events, right? So you can either take it negatively, you can like neutralize it, or you can use it as something positive, as a stepping stone to make you better. There's a current sort of philosophy that I see online, especially on like the TikToks, is be the main character of your own story. Look at what is some of the most popular movies is superheroes. Every superhero has an origin story, right? He isn't a superhero simply because he has powers. Spider-Man is a superhero because he lost his uncle. He's got like these villains that are always putting him down. And it is rising up to that level of the challenge that makes him a hero. So these rejections aren't happening to you, they're happening for you so that you can rise to the top. Start being the hero of your own story. And so that's the way I look at it. It's like, when I see a girl that I'm super attracted to, maybe she's 6 foot tall, like I love me the tall queen. There's something about it. I'm like, whoo, I'm ready to go. Like
I'm
I
right there with
love
you.
challenge.
No, I'm right there with you. I love a tall queen. Even though I'm 6'2", I was like, you give me a six, or you give me a volleyball player, a WNBA, I will take it.
Yeah, like I've got a crush on like Paige Becker and like some of the WNBA players. I'm like, okay.
And like a lot of people are afraid to admit that, but I was like, no, beauty doesn't have a height requirement. You're into what you're into, and there are a lot of people who are beautiful.
I know everybody says beauty is subjective, but we also have to admit we live in a world where the the beauty standard in America is very like Anglo-centric, right? And so like I know that I don't fit into that, that conventional attractiveness. But I always say like I might not have been born tall, dark, and handsome, but I've settled for being short, stunning, and smooth, right? Bringing the game, so to speak, and that's why I feel like in person is so much more effective because there's only so much I can do on the dating apps. There's only so much
Yeah.
like doctoring and filtering of my photos. Like there's a limit before it goes straight into catfishing.
No, I completely agree with you. And I want to go back and touch on that whole subjective piece. I mean, this is a statement that's as old as time almost, where it's the level of attractiveness and the level of sanity kind of are graphed out. So I say that have to be balanced somehow. So usually the hotter somebody is, the more issues they have to work with. The reason listen, I was like, I can admit that. I was like, the reason I'm so humble is because you're right. I'm not a 10. I'm okay with that, but I bring in a lot of character to merge that gap.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of bringing something more than just your physical look. Like there is a limit to how much I can, look max, right? Everybody needs to look max to a certain degree. But again, like 5'5", this is it. This is it. Not gonna get much better. So everything else has to be like your charm, your personality, your charisma, your story, your culture, your background, all of that, and how you, deploy that when you talk to somebody, such that again, like you were saying, no one can read your mind. No one has telepathy. You have to showcase it in some way because dating is ultimately marketing. Like as a man and the product, so I need to market myself to a woman, and she decides like, okay, this is what makes him a good lover, boyfriend, husband, whatever it is.
It's sad, but I was like, you're right. That's what the dating world is, especially in the swipe culture. It's marketing, it's advertising. What makes you want to double tap? What makes you want to swipe? What makes you want to come back for a second date? Now, as we go through all that, one of the ways that we know we're on the right track or that something could potentially be a match is complimenting. I know as men, we give out a lot of compliments to women, but what would you say has been the most unique or impactful compliment you've ever gotten?
Well, I did not receive my first compliment from a woman, and we're excluding like my mother and like my very first girlfriend until I was
Obvious.
yeah, until I was 24. So I lived half a century or a quarter of a century before I was complimented by a woman. And it was because I was wearing like, this is when I was peacocking and like trying to really be outlandish. It was like velour like pants or something like that. And like this girl complimented me, and it was like the first time I was complimented. Now, like looking back, the entire outfit I have was just very kind of, cobbled together of many disparate elements. But the fact that I was trying, being different, and I was complimented, I was like, okay, I must be on the right track. And so that encouraged me to take more risks, if you will. I mean, to whoever that lady was, giving my first compliment, barring, my mom and my college girlfriend, like, I thank you. That definitely helped.
100%. And that's really the best when it's somebody you don't really know or see frequently and they just like, hey, you're doing this well, or I like that on you. You're like, you know what? I'm going to wear these pants every day so I can get the same reaction. But also, I think every guy really has that moment of where they try to be a little more fashion forward. And so we're like, just wearing all designer, all name brand. You're right. It doesn't necessarily go together. You're wearing 5 different brands, but you're like, something on this is going to hit. I feel good. So I've been there, and you're right. That's a great compliment to have gotten.
Yeah, it's a sad fact that not a lot of guys get complimented in their life, right? It isn't something that women typically do, barring the guys who are already good looking, right? For those who are like just sort of average, they don't really get compliments. Like I said, I was never complimented until I was 24. That's a quarter of a century. And so, I can only imagine other guys who weren't willing to take risks, how they lived through life, not feeling just appreciated as a human being and just being invisible. My heart goes out to them. And all I can say though is sometimes take the risk. Sometimes take the risk of looking the fool. And by being outside the norm, you're going to get noticed more. And if you're doing it right, that's when women will compliment you, hopefully.
That's right. High risk, high reward. Now, we're speaking of those guys who don't get a lot of attention or are afraid to take the risk. I'm guessing some of those guys are your clients. And what's kind of one of your methods that's outside of the traditional male coaching spectrum that you've really used to empower these guys?
I would say the way we teach the ABCs of attraction is like holistic, right? And I don't mean the hippie sense, but more in the sense that we try to be well-rounded, where we address like inner game, outer game, and verbal game. Because I've had entire boot camps where every student didn't speak English as their first language, right? Everyone's a fob. Everyone's like speaking like broken English. So trying to like teach like the lines, the routines isn't going to work. So that's why, I try to be well rounded. But one thing I think would be different to address your point is I always say to my students, be successful because you're an Asian man and not in spite of being Asian. Because so many, Asian guys think being Asian is bad. It, brings you down. Yeah, sure, there's racism. But I say use that strength. So, for example, various things where I might, teach a girl, let's say the conversation is going really well, and I'll teach a girl like some phrase in my language, or I tell the students to do it, and I'll have her repeat it, and she's like, "Oh, what does that mean?" And it's like, "Oh, you like doing a doggy style?" Like, and it's a joke. It's a joke, right? It's like, okay, here, I'll tell you something actually, very romantic. It's like, okay, so like, and depwa. She says, okay, what does that mean? It says, you are very beautiful in Vietnamese. Right? So it's the idea of using my Asian language, culture, whatever to my advantage. Teaching her how to eat with chopsticks or whatever. So I'll use that, or like teach her a little bit of like a Buddhist story, using that to my advantage, pulling her into my world and not simply being like the Asian guy that acts white in order to get girls.
No, I love that. It's a similar practice for what I use for my clients too, is you have to own your weirdness, make it work for you, because some people are really weird. They're awkward. And I was like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you are aware of it and you can utilize it or, make a joke, make her laugh with it, then it almost becomes like a superpower and it's something memorable because that phrase that you taught her, she'll use over and over again. And every time she uses it, who's she going to think about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like being comfortable. If you can be comfortable with yourself, you make other people comfortable around you. So, like you said, embracing your quirks, your weirdness, your eccentricities, whatever it is, be comfortable with it, and everybody else will think, okay, he's cool. It's like he makes me feel comfortable, and you just joking around like your old friend.
I know we probably sound like a broken record. You've probably said it a million times. We've said it a million times on the show, but there really is something to say about authenticity. People notice when you're being authentic, when you're being your genuine self, and they respect it. And sometimes they're really into it. So the more authentic you become, the more likely you are to find somebody who resonates with you.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing as we grow old, and especially in Asian culture, is like saving face. I don't know if you've heard that, like,
Oh, yeah.
like saving face. But everybody does it as they get older, where we start changing our ways of behavior in order to sort of like conform to what we think is appropriate. But another way of saying that is you're being fake, you're lying, right? You're being inauthentic. And if women pick that up, they realize that if you're being inauthentic here, where else are you lying in your life? And so I guess like one of my superpowers is like I treat a random beautiful woman like I treat my old friend. I'll tease her, make fun of her. I'll treat her like an old friend that I just met. And that makes people comfortable because it's authentic. They can see that I'm not trying to fake behavior,
Mhm.
hide anything.
No, yeah, that's a good point. You're right. A little bit of teasing goes a long way. Just like peacocking, that's one of those things you have to be really careful on, because if the teasing becomes too frequent, then you end up in that like that friend zone area again, and it's really hard to dig out of that or to still try to close in a romantic situation. And that's kind of the goal here. I was like, for me, for my clients, for everybody else, I was like, I tell people, I was like, I have enough friends. I don't need. I was like, I don't need any more. I was like, at this, people who are saving face, they hit milestones. They're probably at a point where they're like, I'm looking for commitment, not companionship. There's nothing wrong with either avenue, but you just have to be careful that you don't go too far one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, as one of my coaches, Ozzy, he's our day game coach. He always says that you don't know where the edge is until you stepped off a couple times, and then like you do it and you learn from experiential reference. Like, okay, that wasn't that was I did too far. Now it's time to reel it back because there's only so much theory crafting you can do, right? You actually have to have the successes and the failures to know where these boundaries are for sure.
Now, I mean, I have to ask. I was like, the name of the show, Not So Bad Bachelor Pad. I was like, and as somebody who's also a fellow dating coach, what is your current status right now?
I am single, but I'm like dating. I've been in long term relationships, like a 4 year, 2 year, 8 year before. At where I am not looking to settle down. Like I've had that opportunity and I don't begrudge that of my students. Like as far as I know, still the only dating coach that's ever officiated his own student's wedding. So if that's what my students want, I'm there to support them. But I am not looking to get married anytime soon, if ever.
Hey, that's super cool that you officiated that wedding. And you're right. I'm kind of in that same stride. I was like, I was afraid of 30. I was like, 30 was supposed to be like lock it down season, start having kids, 5-year plan. But realistically, I hit 30 and I was like, I'm still having fun. I was like, what's the rush? I mean, it's also the luxury of being a man is
Mm.
we can have kids until forever. So it's like, if I ever did want to settle down or have kids, there's no real rush to do that. Also, I'm tired of saving face in a sense because so when we're recording this episode, it's right before Thanksgiving, and one of the most common questions I get Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you guys probably already know where I'm going. When are you giving me grandbabies? When are you going to bring somebody around? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, that's my new answer. I was like, I don't know. I'm not in a rush.
I was gonna say, I'm fortunate enough where my little brother has a son and a daughter, so
Yeah.
that pressure got taken off of me. The grandkids are already here, so
I think so. I was the same way. So I'm the youngest of four. I was the same way because my first two brothers have had kids, but now those kids are like either out of college or they're getting older. So they're like, okay, we need babies again. And I was like, so me and my other brother, we keep looking at each other, rocking, like, hey, who's going to be the one to do it? And I was like, listen, you already have a committed girlfriend. So I was like, I think it should be you. You should have it. But also, there's no rush. I mean, we have so many people on this planet right now. I was like, we don't need an extra 2 or 3. Let's just enjoy.
well, yeah. I will say this: having coached for so long, so many thousands of men, and I was at my student William, that's the one whose wedding I officiated. I'm sort of like a god uncle to his two kids, and I was there to celebrate the 10th anniversary of him
Yeah.
and his two kids. In many regards, my students are like my kids because you have to imagine, like, some of them come to me 20s, 30s, 40s, and like physically they're men, but maybe mentally and emotionally they're still boys because they were never taught the ways of manhood. And so, like, I sort of like see them grow in the course of a weekend, and especially as part of our long-term training, see them grow over time and years. And like I said, so many of them have now gotten married and have kids. Like, I don't really feel the pressure, honestly. There's no biological clock ticking for me when it comes to having kids.
Yeah. I totally get that. You're right. Because a lot of the coaching that I do and the stuff that the Not So Bad crew does, it's early days heavy, getting you ready to start dating or to clutch a situation with somebody you're interested. I was like, we do a lot getting you into the relationship. And then after that, they usually go to other coaches or they take a break from our sessions. And that's what it's designed to do. I was like, you don't need to be with me forever. Like, I'm always here for you, but I got you to the start of the race. Now you got to run it.
Yeah,
So you see that growth.
it's sort of like the way I describe it is like we're like a driving school, right?
Yeah.
So they learn how to drive, they get used to driving, and that's it. I mean, they don't really need to come back unless maybe they want to get super specialized training of getting on the race car track and driving a Lamborghini. The vast majority of the students that come to me, like, they just want to date quality girls. Like, they don't necessarily want to be like actual playboys and sleep with 100 women. There are a few of them, and bless their hearts. Vast majority is like you said, get them to that starting line, and then get them ready for dating and let them experience both the trials and tribulations of dating.
I don't know how in the course of 4 years that I have not found a more perfect analogy to coaching than what you just gave. Like, I've never thought to equate it to driving school or like something before that. But you're really right. You come in with the permit, you say, hey, I want to learn how to do this. I was like, okay, here are the basics. Here's how to be safe. There you go. Take the test. You're on your way. But that's really what we do. And not so many words. So that was a great analogy. I'm going to have to borrow that. Of course, I'll give credit. Now, we talked about how we spend a lot of time before relationships. You talked about how you've maintained this bond after you're done coaching a lot of people. But this is a great opportunity because, at least for me, I think you are the first Asian person, that I've had on the show. And I've had a lot of Asian friends or, biracial friends who have some Asian lineage in there. And this is the thing that comes up a lot is dating is a little harder for, I feel, especially over here in the Western Hemisphere for you guys, because you're right. It's even as a black man, I was like, we're not the status quo, or if people are into us, it's usually like, depending on the age range of the time, it's like some exotic fantasy or act of rebellion. So what do you think are some of the things that really help you and your clients and other non-white people kind of do well in this culture, in this dating climate that we're in?
As Asians, while on one hand there's like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back when it comes to kind of Asian standards of beauty, right? There's the advent of K-pop, if you will. This sort of new introduction of masculinity that doesn't fall under typical Western Eurocentric norms, right? And I've never been a believer in the entire sort of idea like the alpha male, right, or anything like that, and sort of like pseudo evolutionary psychology. Look at various cultures and history, like masculinity has expressed itself in many different ways. And so there's this, there are more people that see different sides of masculinity that, K-pop and other things showcase. But at the same time, with COVID, where anti-Asian hate has risen something like 1,000%, right? And then we've got the, not to get political, but we've got the Trump presidency coming into play, and I'm going to wager that there will be more rising anti-Asian sentiment, right? And so I think it behooves all of us Asian guys to have that emotional resilience dealing with any kind of prejudices and racism, and just be very aware of your surroundings and the happenings. Like, during COVID, I was like attacked 3 times on the street, like physically attacked, right? And I think that as Asian, let's put our work ethic and intellect and all the positive stereotypes that come into play in being successful, because it's not really going to be handed to us, especially in the dating arena where we face such an uphill battle. And so this is where I say, put in the grind. You can't be successful. It's like, 5'5", unattractive Asian guy can be successful. All you guys should be able to.
You brought it up like during COVID, I was like, just the Asian hate, I was just ridiculous. So I'm glad to see that you're okay, and that you and your business is still able to thrive through the pandemic, through all that. Let's not knock it. You have done pretty well for yourself as a man, as a dating coach. I've worked with a lot of coaches over the course of the show, and not all the coaches have a big enough practice where they can bring multiple people in on their team. Sometimes it's just them and themselves and they, so the fact that you were able to, really expand and sustain for, actually, I don't even think I asked, when did you start coaching her?
I guess 20 years ago. I forget the exact. This was like the very beginning of the Project Hollywood days, like 2008. I forget. I'm an OG of those times. Like, again, like right when dating apps were just being created, and it was still a stigma associated with it. Not every dating coach, guru can make it full time. Obviously, it's what I do full time. It's because we offer, I think, such a rarefied skill. Like, it's hard to replicate, especially as agents, because it's such more in-person work, right? And it isn't something, that you can just simply read. You can read, like I said, you can read, you can watch all of this, but the likelihood of someone actually just being able to learn off of YouTube, unless you're very like OCD and very like committed and have high discipline, is pretty rare. And so this is where, like, this as coach, this is what makes us coaches, the ability to take someone in real life and push them, encourage them, educate them, demonstrate and role model for them that simply reading or watching, is not going to cover.
No, I 100% agree. I always say this, I loved my time at university, but in a sense, I think it was a waste because education essentially exists in a vacuum. You're taught all this great information, but once you leave school, it's really hard to apply that. And dating's the same way, coaching, like almost everything in life is. Like, unless you learn it on a practical level, it's really hard to apply it and see tangible results.
Yeah, it's like I just went on a weight loss journey because during COVID, I got up to like 201 pounds. So I was like technically like obese, right? And one of the things I've learned in losing 60 pounds over the course of like 2 years is like game and fitness is very similar. You see the results that you put in. If you don't put in any kind of work or commitment or discipline, you're not going to lose weight. You're not going to gain muscle. Same thing with game, right? If you are just staying at home playing World of Warcraft, it's just not going to happen for you. But the more work you put in, the better results that you slowly get. Except like the pain is different. Like with gym pain, it's physical pain, and then like it's done the next day, right? It's the emotional pain, if you will, that so many guys are scared of. But it's just ephemeral. It's just in our head. This is where building emotional resilience to the point where you get rejected. It's like, okay, it is what it is. Like a couple weeks ago, I had like 2 really good nights and then like 1 really bad night. And it's like, okay. And then it's like, that was it. Simply because it was bad doesn't affect my self-esteem and how I view myself as a man. Because we're going to have good times, we're going to have bad times. And it's how we lift ourselves up after we get knocked down. That really is a mark of manhood, in my opinion.
No, I love that explanation. And you're right. It really is. The scariest part about spitting game is the 5 seconds leading up to you actually approaching somebody and hearing that no. Because after you hear the no, realistically, you're like, that actually wasn't so bad, or that didn't affect me as much as I thought it did. And then you go on to the next. It doesn't really slow your day down, after you do the work. Because if it is life shattering for you that you hear a no, maybe we should do some other work to understand that. It really doesn't change anything. You're right. You're still you. There's nothing wrong with that. And just go try it again when you see somebody else.
And here's something in many ways where game is better than fitness. If you work out wrong, like you're gonna hurt yourself potentially. But in game, like you can fail your way to success, which is like how many guys do you know are complete bums, but they're sleeping with some hotties. Like you can just fail your way into a woman's bed. Doable. Like you don't have to be perfect at game. That's the interesting thing, right? You don't have to be perfect.
That is so true. I was like, it's a sign. It's a phenomenon even I can't understand. Because I was like, we know. I get why you would be with him and why you would be with him, but how did this one happen? I was like, I need an instant replay because I guess there's something I can learn from you too.
Yeah, it's both like science and art, right? Like the science part fascinates me as a former aerospace engineer, but there's an art to it. There's a fluidity and a dynamicness to it that you have to be able to adjust on the fly, right? It isn't linear process.
And that's why, honestly, it's a big part of my practice because I'm a physical learner. Like, I need to actually do in order to commit things to memory or to make it my own. And so that's why in a lot of my workshops and a lot of the sessions, I have my clients actually talk these things out, like actually pretend like they're shooting their shot. Because I was like, sometimes you have to get used to being a little cringe, but I guarantee like it may feel awkward while we're doing it in session. But when by the time you get out to seeing somebody you're actually attracted to, it's like clockwork, it's butter. And you have that adaptability because that's a really key strong suit when you're in person versus on the app. On the app, you have so much time to craft a response or to craft the perfect picture or whatever, bio. But in person, you can physically see if you're losing your audience or if you don't have enough bait to reel them in. So you have to switch lanes. So you're right, that adaptability is crucial.
Yeah, I think this is the two primary dating funnels, if you will, dating apps and in person. What I find is such a large difference when it comes to the clients is with the dating apps, it's very results oriented in that you get your profile and your picture is really good. You can absolutely get a bunch of dates, right? Kind of like depending upon like your own natural starting point of your sexual market value. But what I find is it doesn't help them on a personal level. There's very little self development or building their confidence or any kind of like social skills building or even emotional wellness, right? While the in person part is very much more about building that core identity, building the confidence, the social skills. And, there's something to be said like, yeah, you want some wins because sometimes there'll be some rough times trying to go out and approach and you get rejected and you don't even get a number. And here's like, okay, Tinder, okay, get a date like, that weekend, maybe hook up, right? So there's something about just, getting a couple easy wins under your belt. But I think it is so vital for guys to work on themselves. As you say, like the bar is so low. So if you're a guy that is willing to embark on the journey of self-improvement, work on yourself, you're going to be differentiated from like 99% of guys out there.
Hey, man. Now, I think we're slowly creeping into my favorite segment of the show, and that is our quickie questions. Now, guys,
Okay.
I know I'm kind of straight away from this, but I got to bring it back because we're just in a good space right now. So the whole point of these questions is they're right off the dome. I don't want you to think too hard about them, but they will get a little more intense as we go along. You ready? The first one, it's a new one. It's easy. So we talked about our dating superpowers. So I'm going to give you three dating superpowers to pick from, and I want to know which one would you choose and why. Okay?
Okay. That's an interesting one. All right.
The three options you have to do is instant charm, perfect text replies, or never getting ghosted. Which one would you pick?
Perfect text replies. Like I'm already charming in person. Like
Yes.
that's already there. Getting ghosted, it happens. It doesn't really affect me. The thing was, I wasn't born in the generation where we had phones. Again, I'm dating myself, right? So my text game is just serviceable. It is just serviceable. I'm not a master. Like I use memes a lot because it's hard for me to joke. I can do joking in person, but the text crafting, that's always like I'm just barely serviceable. That's it. It's enough to get the job done. I'm not the wittiest person. The wit comes into play when I'm there with.
Listen, I love that. You were decisive. You knew right away. It was like, hey, here's an opportunity for me to improve something that I need help with. Craft the best text reply. I love it. I think for me, I think it would be the instant charm. It's that moment where you make eye contact with somebody. If I can get them to lock in, I know, all right, my chances of actually closing skyrocketing right now.
Yeah, I've learned to be what do they call it, like a firecracker, a whole lot of dynamite in a small package. That's how I had to learn game, right?
Yeah, I get that. I'm right there with you. I was definitely one of those people who failed into success early on. You've been doing this for 20 years. So obviously what you're teaching to your clients and the people who are coming to you is from the lens of somebody who's been doing this for a few decades. But if you had to go back and tell young 18, 19, 21-year-old you some vital information about like dating or, even relationships, what would that be?
It's a kind of a serious topic. To take advantage of the time that you have with a particular person, because not only as we as men don't have all the time in the world, your partner might not either. So, love her as long as you can, because she, neither one of us are guaranteed tomorrow.
You hear it 1,000 times, but it doesn't become any less valid of a thing. We really aren't promised tomorrow, so you really have to live in the moment. Or sometimes this was me a few years ago. Is I spent so much time in my head. It's wild, probably the amount of opportunities that were missed in that time period. I was like, we talk ourselves out of a lot. So be in the moment. Yeah. Alrighty. Another good one I have. Now I have a goal. I was like, we're in 2025. I'm claiming it now. Somebody I want to have on the show. Angela White. Okay.
The adult actress?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Listen, I was like righteous and ratchet. As much as we love South Grove, sometimes you got to get a little dirty. So is there anybody that it could be professionally or personally, that you would love to work with, at some point in time?
Simu Liu, I think. He was Shang-Chi. So, yeah. So it's just that we don't have a lot of Asian role models, right? So someone that is in the limelight. But also because one of my coaches, Captain Dan, him and Simu have sort of like online beef, right? It's like because at one point Simu had like commented because Dan had been on a reality dating show, right? And then like Simu had sent like commented some shade, right? And so Dan like shot back, and then Dan said something about the Barbie thing, or saying so. It's been a little bit of sniping. Like I myself have nothing against Simu, right? It's just like the beef is between my coach and him. So it would actually be kind of nice to talk to him like, hey man, I respect what you're doing. I know it's really hard being Asian in Hollywood, so I totally get it. So that beef, that's between you two. It has nothing to do with me.
No, I get that. Like, listen, everybody loves a little bit of controversy. Let's be honest. Alrighty, this one, I think it was really tough, or I was a late bloomer in this sense too, just because of my background. And so I want to know if it was really the same for you. When was the first time that you told somebody that you loved them, not being your mom?
I would say it was like my college girlfriend. It took years, though, like maybe the second year of just dating, because obviously in Asian society, culture, typically the love languages, so to speak, isn't words of affirmation. If you want to go through like the 5 love languages, it's typically like gifts or acts of service, food and the things that we do for a loved one. So like I don't even remember as a kid like my mom saying she loved me, right? But I knew she did because of the things that she did for us to make sure like giving the clothes off her back and all of that. But you also have to understand like not all Asian languages is there a one-to-one translation to I love you. That kind of exists in Vietnamese. There isn't a one-to-one translation of the words I love you in English to Vietnamese, right? So even though I didn't receive that, and it was sort of hard for me to say it to someone because the only saying I can model it was just what I saw off of TV. So I was like, is this what I feel? I think it's what I feel because that's what it says on TV. Like, I don't know. And then, I was finally able to say it like maybe when I was like 21, 22. Like, honestly, it took a while.
No, I'm right there with you. I was like, I probably didn't say it to somebody I wasn't related to until I was probably about 2021, 2021. And even still after that, I think I've only said it to one other person besides that person. And that was going on 10 years ago. So maybe two people in the course of 3 decades is crazy.
I mean, I would definitely say I'm more free with that word. So it isn't something that I have to hang on as if it's precious and as if I only have a certain amount of times I can say it. Because like I've dated girls where for them their love language is words of affirmation. Like I've had times when people compliment me and it's like, okay, thanks. Like it doesn't really emotionally affect me. But I appreciate the sentiment that it's coming from and I also understand that sometimes that's what people are looking for. Rather than the appreciate like love itself can have different forms. There's like, being in love or just falling in love, so I feel like I can be more free with that word, although I don't use it simply willy-nilly. But like I said that to my mom, now that we're adults and she says it to me, we say it in English. And the first time it happened, I'm like, okay, that's cool. But it wasn't like fireworks of like, it's so amazing, my life changed. And like, all right, cool. But for me, it's like, it's when my mom, go home for Christmas and she just cooks that spread of homemade Vietnamese cooking. Oh my God, that's love right there, man.
Listen, I tell people food has always been my love language. Me and my mom have talked about this several times over the years. We're both just not, people think we're weird for it, but we don't have that like lovey-dovey, super physical, emotional type of love. And I was like, she's almost like one of the guys in the sense is like, you do a lot of head nods, high fives. But you're right. But when she cooks for me or when she's not feeling good and then I go home and I cook for her, that's when I can tell through her actions that she loves me and I love her.
Yeah, I mean, and one might argue if you really want to get philosophical, if that's like a hallmark of like Western American sort of culture where you can create like, capitalism off of it, right? Valentine's and all of that. The movies, right? The movies require that, right? To create that drama. But, now the culture is about action, it's about service.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, fine, you have someone that says, I love you, but they're not willing to do anything for you, right? It was like, during COVID, people were like, we're not going to vaccinate our kids. Again, I don't want to get philosophical or political. I'm like, oh, the grandparents, they have to die in order to, keep the economy going, all this kind of weird stuff, right? Or, gun laws, stuff like that is, it just boils down to, do you want love to be shown just through words? Because words can be empty, but you want it to be shown through like act, right? Because there's an entire conflict, if you will, in the Asian community itself, where so many Asian kids are sort of like blaming our parents for their generational trauma. And for certain, there's a lot of that to go around. I've got some of that. But as I look at like, Caucasian parents and that kind of culture, it's like, it's only on the surface is it like all lovey dovey and great. They got their own fucking dysfunction. Like they are not the perfect example of like parental love. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Like don't be sitting on Asian parents just because you see on TV, ooh, this is what like parents are supposed to be because they're white.
No, I was like, I will take my generational trauma any day because it was real. It was authentic. We talked about that earlier. That's not me saying like we love the trauma. We're working through our stuff, but it was real. All right, last question before we wrap it up. Somebody told me that my friends are a reflection of who I am. So I'm going to put that back on you. If your friends are a reflection of who you are, what does that say about you?
That we are probably a lot of men of color. I like almost pretty much only have like Asian and Mexican friends. Like honestly, God, I don't know what that says about me.
You're eating good.
Yeah, I don't really hang out with a lot of like other. I mean, white girls, sure, but no like white dudes.
I get that. I love that. And it's really wild how like some communities break down. And for the longest part, like growing up, most of my friends were people of color. It's not until like I was almost done with high school or like some pockets of college that I really started to hang out with more white people. Sometimes it feels like I cross over to the Twilight Zone whenever I'm in those groups, I'm like, is this what it's like over here? Like it's bizarre. Like it's a whole different universe. And then I'll go back over here. Like I said, I grew up with mostly like Black and Latino people around me. So I come back home and then I'm just like, yeah, that other side's just wild.
Yeah. Well, I sort of like grew the reverse, being raised in Texas, so being one of the very few Asians in general, and then going to college out in Florida in a technical school. So I was definitely raised like whitewashed with just like white people, pretty much in general. It's only when I really got into like pickup and very curiously, you know, I don't really fall into the purely Asian American community, but I also don't fall purely into like the manosphere, kind of community. It's sort of like that little crossover in the Venn diagram. But as younger, it's very whitewashed, but here in, getting into game made me embrace my Asianness, made me very proud of who I am, my culture, my background, instead of being one of those Asians that's like, that's going to try to act like a white dude, a white Chad in order to get girls.
Before we wrap up, obviously, I want to give you the time. That's a huge thank you for stopping in today, dropping some wisdom, giving us a lot of perspective that you just like you said, there aren't a lot of Asian men as representation. So for that, my listeners who I just can't connect with on some levels, thank you for giving them like an outlet to or a resource that they can now, tap into to take their journey to the next step. But this is a question that I asked a lot last season, this season. I think I'm just going to start incorporating it. You've done a lot of speaking engagements. You've been on a lot of different shows, articles. What's something that you just really haven't had a chance to talk about that you would love to talk about? And then also, where can we find you if we're looking to connect?
Well, I guess the irony of being a dating coach is there's only so much dating stuff I want to talk about. As I would be like the OBGYN gynecologist, it's like there's only so much, women's parts that you can see before it just kind of gets boring. And, I'm there to help my students, but it's like, how many times can I just simply say, like, this is how you get a girl's number? Not a big deal. This is how you make her laugh. Not a big deal. So it kind of gets a little bit sort of boring. So to engage like with you to talk more like the higher level of the philosophical or the racial constructs of of society, to be able to talk about that, I think is more intellectually stimulating for me as opposed to being asked the questions. Okay, what's your favorite pickup line? Right? It's like, all right, what's your favorite text message? I mean, I'll do it, but it isn't that fun for me. So
Right.
for that opportunity.
Of course. Listen, I've been in your, like I said, we've been doing this for 4 years, and I get tired of asking the same questions. So I can only imagine you get tired of hearing the same questions. So I try to spice it up, make it a little different for you. So like I said, where can we find you if we're looking to get some dating help? Where can we find you if we're just trying to stay in the loop on what's going on with JT?
Yeah, you can find me at abcsofattraction.com. That's where we have our boot camps, which is live training program from Friday to Sunday. It's a weekend live training. And we have more advanced training like long-term training, Euro tours, Latin tours. And if you're just getting a 30-day free trial just to see, a little bit of our teaching, go to abcsofattraction.com/academy/special. And for all the Joshua Jones Bachelor Pad audience, try it out 30 days for free. And if you like what you see, let me know. Whether it's like advanced lectures from self-improvement to the Korean skincare to how to raise kids, half Asian or full Asian, fashion, as well as infill pickup videos of us actually approaching, pulling, dating, so you actually see it at the safety of your own home.
Alrighty, guys. You heard them here. I'm going to make sure I leave all those links down below in the comments. You know this. I'm not a selfish guy. I'm all about your growth. I'm all about your happiness. So obviously, if there are things that JT and everybody else at ABC Coaching can do for you that I can't, please go over there because, like he said, you have to own the story. You have to become that lead character. And listen, it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there. That's what's important. But remember to like, share, subscribe if you haven't done that because we have plenty of other great episodes out here. And I will see all you amazing people next week for another episode of the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad.